Love is a profound journey, yet sometimes, in the pursuit and preservation of it, we risk compromising something equally precious: our self-respect and personal dignity. This becomes particularly challenging as we age, facing the changes time brings and the fear of loneliness, making us vulnerable to the temptation of proving ourselves, often at the cost of our own happiness and inner peace. The story shared in this article delves deeper than just a romance between a man and a woman. It is a poignant struggle for dignity, for the right to self-love, and for the crucial realization that true worth is inherent and does not hinge on the approval or validation of others. We will follow the emotional journey of an elderly man who, despite his best efforts, found himself ensnared in a relationship that systematically stripped him of the dignity he had carried throughout his life. This is ultimately a story of courage. The courage to face harsh truths. The courage to walk away from a toxic dynamic despite lingering attachments. And most importantly, the courage to embark on the path of reclaiming oneself, reaffirming core values, and rediscovering inner strength. The lessons he learned are not confined to those in their later years. They serve as a powerful reminder for anyone seeking confidence, striving to understand the vital importance of self-love, and recognizing that true wisdom often accompanies age, teaching us the power of valuing ourselves first. Before we get started, I'd love to know where you're joining me from today. Drop a comment below, and feel free to ask any questions you have. And don't forget to hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you never miss a health-boosting tip from Elder's Guidance. In the beginning, it felt like a dream made real, as if he had stumbled upon an unexpected second chance at a life he thought was long behind him. She arrived in his world, showering him with compliments that felt like warm sunlight, breaking through years of cold self-doubt. Her words were both tender and precise, seemingly crafted to know exactly what he needed to hear to rekindle a fire within him. She called him strong, capable, and wise, suggesting his age lent him a unique gravitas and charm that no younger man could ever hope to emulate. Her affection seemed so utterly genuine, so consuming, that he began to believe again in a version of himself he had long since forgotten. A man who was virile, desirable, and truly worthy of love. There was an energy in every look she gave him, a charge that made his heart race. Her smiles held a playful seduction, and her gestures flowed with a deliberate grace. It was clear she had mastered the art of making him feel as though he was the only man in the world who mattered. Eager to keep her captivating gaze fixed upon him, he bent over backward to please her. No effort seemed too great. He went out of his way constantly to ensure her happiness, treating her like royalty who had bestowed upon him the rare privilege of her attention. Nothing felt too extravagant or too troublesome if it was for her. In his eyes, she wasn't just a woman. She was a radiant beacon of youth and vitality, a force that made him feel alive in ways he hadn't experienced in decades. He threw himself into this connection, swept up in the intoxicating feeling of renewed relevance and the promise of shared joy, completely unaware of the subtle shifts that lay just beneath the surface of this seemingly perfect union. If you enjoyed this video, comment 1 to let me know. If not, comment 2. Your thought mattered to me either way. But as the idyllic days turned into weeks, tiny, almost imperceptible cracks began to form in the foundation of their seemingly perfect world. At first, they were subtle, the kind of things easily dismissed as personality quirks or simple misunderstandings. She started making suggestions, carefully framed as well-meaning advice, yet carrying an undercurrent of something else. "You really should take better care of yourself," she remarked one day, her tone light but hinting at condescension. "A man your age shouldn't be struggling with things like this." He laughed it off initially, treating it as a playful jab, but the remarks didn't cease. They grew more frequent, consistently disguised as concern, but landing like tiny darts aimed squarely at his self-esteem. What began as small suggestions slowly morphed into persistent criticisms. Her voice started carrying a sharper edge, a subtle but unmistakable air of superiority. A constant implicit reminder that she was younger, fitter, and more vibrant than he was. He began to feel the weight of her words, noticing how they lingered uncomfortably long after their conversations ended. Casually at first, but with increasing regularity, she began to remind him that he was, in her eyes, too old for her. Each time it felt like an unexpected slap, chipping away at the confidence she had initially helped build. He noticed the shift in her tone when she spoke to him, less adoration, more judgment. Yet he convinced himself it was merely a temporary rough patch, a storm that would eventually pass. The true tipping point, however, arrived in the most intimate sphere of their relationship. She began to criticize his performance in bed, wielding words that pierced directly through his carefully maintained confidence. For a man who had always prided himself on his capacity for deep love and emotional satisfaction, her comments were devastatingly effective. "You're slow," she stated one night, her words sharp as knives. "Predictable. I need more than this." She compared him unfavorably to younger men, highlighting an area where he felt he could never compete, no matter how hard he tried. It wasn't merely his physical ability she critiqued. It felt like an attack on his very essence as a man. Yet, in the very same breath, she would occasionally dangle crumbs of approval, just enough to keep him emotionally tethered. She'd tell him that no one else could possibly love her with the unique dedication and care he provided. She'd reassure him that his tenderness and attentiveness were rare gifts, qualities utterly lacking in younger men. These fleeting moments of validation, however, were invariably laced with a subtle mockery. She would sometimes laugh at his earnest attempts to please her, dismissing them as desperate. Blinded by the glimmers of hope and his own desire to win her over completely, he couldn't see the cruel pattern of manipulation for what it truly was. All he saw was a chance, however slim, to prove himself and regain the idyllic connection they once shared. He tried with dwindling resolve to endure the onslaught, clinging to the belief that true love demanded patience and sacrifice. He told himself repeatedly that if he could just weather this storm, she would eventually recognize his worth. But the storm only intensified. Her words became finely honed weapons, relentlessly cutting away at his confidence, until he scarcely recognized the man reflected in mirrors or memories. He began to internalize her perspective, seeing himself through her critical eyes. An aging man struggling desperately to stay relevant, pathetically clinging to the illusion of a youth long gone. The man of experience and wisdom he once felt himself to be faded, replaced by the image of a relic, pitiable at best, mocked at worst. To an outsider, his choice to remain might seem baffling, perhaps even pathetic. But love, especially when it twists into toxicity, possesses a unique power to bind its victims with invisible chains. It wasn't merely her youth or perceived beauty that kept him tethered. It was the intermittent hope she strategically offered, those fleeting glimpses of warmth that made him believe things could, somehow, get better. He was a prisoner not only of her calculated manipulation, but also of his own deep-seated need to prove his worth to someone fundamentally incapable of seeing it. The tragedy of his situation lies in its haunting familiarity. How many of us have lingered in circumstances that drained our spirit, convinced that our love alone possessed the power to mend what was fundamentally broken? How often do we allow ourselves to be diminished, hoping our sacrifices will finally compel someone to acknowledge our value? His story serves as a painful illustration of love's dark potential. how it can elevate us to euphoric heights, only to drag us down into the lowest depths. He wasn't merely trying to win her approval anymore. He was engaged in a desperate battle to reclaim a fundamental piece of himself he felt slipping away, a piece he feared might be lost forever. And it was this internal fight, more than anything else, that ultimately broke him. One evening, following yet another argument that left his heart heavy and his spirit bruised, he retreated into the quiet sanctuary of his room. He sat engulfed in silence, the oppressive weight of the evening pressing down on him. Every exchanged word replayed in his mind, each barb cutting deeper than the last. The sting of being made to feel small, insignificant, and unworthy had become a chronic ache. But something shifted within him that night. He could no longer ignore the dull, persistent throb of unhappiness that had insidiously settled into every corner of his existence. With startling clarity, he knew he had reached his absolute breaking point. Standing before the mirror, he took a long, hard look at the reflection staring back, a 70-year-old man gazing into his own weary eyes. His thoughts traced the lines etched on his face. They weren't signs of failure, but markers of a life fully lived, battles fought, love given, and sometimes lost. His graying hair, his weathered features, they told a story of decades spent growing, learning, surviving. Yet, in that moment, he couldn't escape the feeling that somewhere along the way, he had allowed himself to be reduced, letting someone else's opinion overshadow his intrinsic sense of worth. It was in that quiet, reflective moment that the crucial realization dawned. Self-love had to rise above all else. It wasn't arrogance or selfishness. It was essential for survival. He couldn't continue living as if his value depended on the approval of someone who refused to see the man he truly was. He couldn't keep shrinking himself to fit into a space that offered no room for his experiences, his wisdom, or his heart. And so, for the first time in years, he made a decision born purely out of necessity for his own well-being, a choice both terrifying and profoundly necessary. Armed with his newfound, albeit fragile resolve, he approached her the following evening. There was a mixture of trepidation and determination within him, yet he managed to begin the conversation with a calmness he hadn't known he possessed. Looking her directly in the eye, he explained how he felt, how the relationship had slowly, insidiously eroded his confidence, how he could no longer endure being treated as if he were invisible or inadequate. He stated, in no uncertain terms, that love should never come at the expense of his self-respect. No matter how much he had cared for her, no matter how deeply he had once hoped things might change, he couldn't continue down this destructive path. If staying meant sacrificing his dignity, he was prepared to walk away. The conversation was as painful as it was liberating. She dismissed his feelings, brushing them off as overreactions, perhaps even dramatics. But this time, he didn't waver. For the first time in their relationship, he stood firm, grounded not in anger or resentment, but in the quiet strength that came from finally acknowledging his own worth. It was an undeniably bittersweet moment. A part of him genuinely mourned the end of what they once had, the dream that had soured, while another part celebrated the nascent reclaiming of something he had almost forgotten entirely: self-respect. When he walked out of the house that night, he felt a strange confluence of emotions. There was sorrow, naturally. Letting go of someone he had loved, even a toxic version of love, wasn't easy. But overwhelming the sorrow was a profound sense of relief. A heavy, suffocating weight that had been pressing down on him for years seemed to instantly lift. For the first time in what felt like an eternity, he could breathe freely. The air itself felt lighter, his steps less burdened. In that moment of departure, he realized he hadn't just walked away from her. He had finally started walking toward himself. The days and weeks that followed were an undeniable test of his resolve. Loneliness, an unwelcome visitor, crept in, wrapping itself around him, particularly during the long, quiet nights. He missed the simple presence of another person in the house, the ambient sound of another voice, even the basic comfort of shared silence. However, he began to notice something remarkable about this solitude. While difficult, it felt different from the loneliness he'd experienced within the relationship. This wasn't the hollow ache of being unappreciated or unseen. It was a quiet, dignified solitude, a space that unexpectedly allowed him to begin the process of rediscovering himself. He started to reflect on his life journey, not with regret, but with a growing sense of gratitude for all he had endured and learned. He remembered the hopeful, dreaming younger version of himself and realized that man, though buried, was still present. Slowly, tentatively, he began reconnecting with parts of himself long neglected. He reached out to old friends, people who had known him before the relationship began chipping away at his identity. He dusted off hobbies he hadn't touched in years, finding simple, unadulterated joy in the act of creating and exploring once again. One day, standing before the mirror again, he saw someone different looking back. The man reflected was not defined by his age or his wrinkles, but by his resilience. Every line on his face now seemed to tell a story of triumph, of survival, of love given freely. Every gray hair felt like a testament to wisdom earned through lived experience. He was no longer viewing himself through the distorted lens of others' judgment. He saw himself as he truly was, a man of inherent value, strength, and infinite potential. As the months passed, his world began to bloom in unexpected ways. He traveled to places he had only dreamed of visiting, immersing himself in the beauty of new landscapes and experiences. He found profound joy in the simplest things: a sunrise, a good book, the easy laughter of an old friend. He came to understand, deeply and fundamentally, that his worth had never depended on external approval. It had always resided within him, waiting patiently to be claimed. He learned that true love, the kind that accepts, respects, and values unconditionally, must start from within. It is the love we cultivate for ourselves that sets the standard for how others should treat us. As he moved forward, he carried this essential lesson. Life is simply too short to spend proving your worth to someone who refuses to see it. Aging, he discovered, wasn't about loss. It was about uncovering what truly matters. And what mattered most was that he had finally found peace, not in someone else's arms, but securely within his own heart. This moving anecdote serves as a profound and emotional reminder, particularly for older individuals who may be grappling with doubts surrounding love, companionship, and self-worth in their later years. The yearning for connection is deeply ingrained in us as human beings, transcending age. Yet, as we navigate the complexities of life and relationships over time, it becomes crucial to remember that the pursuit of love should never demand the sacrifice of our inner serenity, our hard-won self-respect, or the core values we've spent a lifetime cultivating. While the desire to reconnect with the vitality or passion of youth is understandable, it often carries inherent risks, especially when it tempts us to compromise our dignity or invest heavily in relationships that diminish rather than uplift us. Reflecting on his painful experience, the man in our story came to understand that the relationship he had entered, despite its initially intoxicating allure, was never a true partnership. It was a one-sided dynamic built on shaky ground, constantly testing his self-esteem. His younger partner, while perhaps charming, could not fully appreciate or comprehend the depth of his life experiences, the wisdom he carried, or the unique vulnerabilities that can accompany aging. Consequently, he found himself perpetually trying to prove his worth in ways that felt increasingly alien, requiring him to step further and further away from his authentic self. The initial excitement blinded him to the true cost, not just the emotional energy poured into a fruitless endeavor, but the quiet, steady erosion of his sense of self, with every compromise made, every inner warning ignored. Ending the relationship demanded immense courage and painful self-reflection. Yet it was precisely in this act of walking away that he began to reclaim his identity. He realized that love, in its truest form, cannot possibly thrive where one partner feels a constant pressing need to prove their worth. Genuine love is firmly rooted in mutual respect, where both individuals truly see and honor each other for who they are, not for who they wish the other person to be. His journey underscores several vital lessons. The illusion of youth. While the energy and charm associated with youth can be alluring, they are no substitute for genuine connection, empathy, and respect. Investing time and emotional energy into someone who cannot truly appreciate the depth of who you are, often due to differing life stages or levels of maturity, frequently leads to feelings of inadequacy and frustration. Trying to bridge an unbridgeable gap can become an exhausting trap. The danger of compromise. Love should enrich, not diminish. It should never require the sacrifice of core values or the acceptance of disrespectful treatment. Often, the fear of loneliness can powerfully drive individuals, especially later in life, to tolerate situations they would never have accepted earlier. It's essential to remember that love shouldn't feel like a battlefield or an endurance test. It should be a sanctuary built on mutual understanding and esteem. The importance of self-love. To be loved fully and healthily by another, we must first cultivate love for ourselves. This involves embracing the entirety of who we are, not just our strengths, but also our vulnerabilities, our imperfections, and the scars life inevitably leaves. Self-love forms the bedrock of every healthy relationship. Without it, we risk losing ourselves entirely in the pursuit of external validation or another's elusive approval. The power of integrity. A person's ultimate worth is not defined by their age, appearance, or ability to conform to societal expectations, but by their integrity and resilience in navigating life's inevitable adversities. This inner integrity transforms challenges faced into symbols of strength and hard-earned wisdom, qualities far more valuable than fleeting youth. The gift of reflection. Every relationship, no matter how difficult or painful it may be, presents an invaluable opportunity for learning and growth. By honestly reflecting on our experiences, we gain deeper insights into ourselves, our patterns, our needs, and what truly allows us to thrive. For this man, the toxic relationship inadvertently became a mirror, revealing both his vulnerabilities and his underlying strength. His story stands as a testament to the courage it takes to prioritize one's self and one's dignity, even when it means walking away from something familiar. True happiness, he learned, is not found in the fleeting validation of others, but in the quiet confidence that arises from living authentically and in alignment with one's own values. It is never too late to choose dignity. Delving deeper into the man's journey reveals further profound insights. He once operated under the misconception that enduring harsh criticisms in the name of love was a noble sacrifice, a testament perhaps to his commitment and emotional strength. However, time and painful experience led him to a starkly different understanding. What he had perceived as selfless endurance was, in reality, the slow, insidious erosion of his own dignity. Every dismissive remark swallowed, every unfair judgment silently borne chipped away at his fundamental self-respect. He learned a crucial truth. Authentic love should never demand that we abandon ourselves for the sake of another's comfort or approval. Instead, it should foster mutual growth, understanding, and unwavering respect. He discovered that loving oneself isn't merely an act of self-care. It's closer to a moral obligation. Without that essential foundation of self-worth, we risk allowing others to define our value, opening the door to being mistreated, taken for granted, and ultimately disrespected. Self-love, he came to understand, isn't selfish. It's necessary, the very bedrock upon which all healthy relationships must be built. Recognizing that you inherently deserve kindness, respect, and genuine affection isn't a luxury. It's a fundamental right. Without this core understanding, love can easily transform from a sanctuary into a cage. This revelation, though painful, marked the first step toward reclaiming his life and identity. Perhaps the most difficult, yet ultimately most transformative lesson emerged when he finally found the courage to say, "Enough." Choosing to walk away wasn't merely an act of defiance against mistreatment. It was a moment of profound personal liberation. It signified much more than a simple breakup. It was a critical turning point, a declaration that he would no longer permit himself to be diminished. He realized that leaving a toxic relationship wasn't a mark of failure, but a powerful act of strength and self-preservation. Solitude, which he had once deeply feared, unexpectedly became his refuge. It transitioned from a state to be avoided into a sacred space for healing and renewal. In the quiet stillness of being alone, he unearthed another profound truth. The deep, quiet peace that emanates from self-respect holds far greater value than the fleeting, often chaotic comfort of a dysfunctional relationship. Solitude offered him the invaluable chance to rebuild his self-esteem brick by brick, fostering reflection and allowing him to reconnect with his own desires, values, and dreams, free from the weight of external judgment. Furthermore, his journey reshaped his perspective on aging itself. While society often glorifies youth, he came to see the marks of time, wrinkles, gray hair, a slower pace, not as signs of decline, but as badges of honor, symbols of wisdom hard-earned through decades of experience. Aging, he realized, isn't something to be ashamed of or hidden, but rather celebrated as a testament to resilience and survival. Trying to mold oneself to fit superficial standards is a betrayal of the rich, complex individual one has become. Embracing his story, flaws and all, brought a new sense of freedom. Finally, he gained clarity on the crucial balance of giving and receiving in intimacy. While physical closeness and gestures of affection are vital languages of love, they must be mutual to be meaningful. Acts of love should never feel like mere obligations or be met with indifference. True intimacy thrives on reciprocity, mutual respect, and the acknowledgement of each partner's efforts. Without that mutual valuing, even the most heartfelt gestures lose their significance. Ultimately, the man came to see that walking away wasn't an ending, but the start of a vital new chapter. Through releasing the need for external validation, he found a strength he hadn't known, and a profound peace rooted in his own inherent value. His journey underscores a powerful truth. Life is too short to spend seeking approval from those unable to appreciate your depth. The greatest love story, he discovered, is the one you cultivate with yourself. Looking back, not with regret but gratitude, he valued the lessons learned through pain, embracing the chance to rebuild his life on the solid foundation of self-respect and authenticity. What lesson from his story resonates most deeply with you? If you enjoyed this video, comment 1 to let me know. If not, comment 2. Your thought mattered to me either way.